All please stand and join with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, so for our legislative prayer and or thought, we have Commissioner Kerr tonight. Turn the time over to him.
So I was having a conversation with my 20-year-old the other day, and he asked the same question that I asked once upon a time. And it was, is the world getting worse? And it was an interesting question because it made me remember when I first asked that question. And I didn't know how to answer it, and I still don't know how to answer it, because I think as a 2-year-old, you don't realize what's going on. As a 12-year-old, you may not realize what's going on. As a 22-year-old, you probably still don't know what's going on, at least I didn't. And so you sort of wonder, is the world getting worse, or is it just kind of the same stuff over and over and over and over? You just sort of realize. I don't know how to answer that question, but I will say that I was reflecting, and what made him reflect a lot was some of the random acts of tragedy that we've seen recently, even in Centerville. And I told him, look, I don't know if it's getting worse, but the way that you fight it is you just rely on each other. There are not going to be great people in the world, and sometimes there are going to be bad people in the world, but we can at least be good people. So that's my thought.
Thanks.
Say a quick prayer. Okay. Father in heaven, we're very grateful for the time we have set aside today to go about the government's business. We ask for clarity of thought, for purpose, and for efficiency. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Oh, I can't look at that. Second stop. Turn it off.
We're having seizures over here.
That was crazy.
Where'd that go? Just turn it off. Okay, we're going to jump right into our agenda. We're going to talk about moderate income housing strategies, HB 462. Corey?
Thank you, Chair Daly, members of the commission. We're finally getting to this and staying a little bit ahead of schedule. Last legislative session, you're aware there was HB 462 or House Bill 462 that really kind of went in and revamped the moderate income housing rules at the state level. And that revamping and resetting has caused cities to have to go back into their moderate income housing plan and start adjusting new expectations. There's a lot to the bill per se, but the main criteria for this year is for each city that's required to pick at least a minimum of 3 strategies. So we're supposed to go back into our general plan, look at the strategies that we've adopted, and then look at the new parameters of strategies that are listed. And they added more strategies in the bill than was originally there, and said you need to pick 3. And if you want a priority preference for certain types of grants and funds, excuse me, priority we granted 5. You need to have 5 strategies to be granted priority. Now that doesn't mean that somebody who has 5, somebody has 3, the 5 will always get it, because it'll also be based on the merits of a project you're proposing. So, as I said before, all things being equal value in a project proposal that you're applying for, if there is a theoretical tie in their minds, the priority of the 5 would outweigh the 3 strategies adopted by a city. So I don't think it is a one end and set all. It's just an incentive to say, hey, we want you to take a concerted effort to look at your moderate income housing and your strategies and put something together. So we have to pick 3. And so the question is, do we pick 3? Do we pick 4? Do we pick 5? That's discretionary above 3 that we need to do. We have to look at what they've suggested for us to take a look at and at least adopt those 3. And then by October 1st, there needs to be an implementation plan for it. So adopt your idea, what are you going to try to do? And then the future reporting changes for the following year will come into play, and a further evaluation. Department of Workforce Services will be assigned the task of collecting the information and then looking at it, and if you fall short on your reporting or what you're supposed to do, then they will notify you and give you 90 days to respond to fix it. So they're being a little bit more, they're raising the expectations. That's the best way to say it. The expectation of cities is to try to make a concerted effort to look at moderate income housing in your community and find ways to do it. Does that mean that you have to be successful? No, because part of the reporting is to find out what you tried, what happened, report what you think happened or why it didn't work out, and then the state's going to go back in and look at those things from the different cities, what's happening, if these aren't successful, so. And a really easy one is ADU units. We adopted an ADU ordinance. We were underway, and then that ended up being a strategy. We adopted it. We officially have 2. Now, we know there's others out there operating without the license, but we officially have 2. It looks like we'll have probably 1 more for sure and a 4th one being considered. So that's great, but it's not going to
Fire
rate.
as well?
What's that?
Wasn't that also changed in the legislature with ADUs? That was a requirement changed as well?
Yeah, they've required it, and they've added the component that, to take away the impact fees. So if you were a city that did impact fees, they wanted you to remove those impact fees for ADUs.
So does it still count as a strategy for us once it was then required?
Once it's accomplished, it falls off your chart, and you have to go back and re-examine the strategies and add to them back again. So I think that's where it'll be interesting over time what really happens. But right now, the synergy for ADUs is not going to solve our local moderate income housing needs. It facilitate a few, maybe, but it's not going to solve it. And I think that's what will eventually likely to happen, unless, for whatever reason, because I think everybody was thinking with all the inflated housing prices, ADUs would be great. But now that you're seeing all kinds of problems with inflation, interest rates, taking a loan out to even remodel your home, all of a sudden that changes. And so I think that's a market response to what happened. Well, life took place. And so not all of these things will work out. But they want you to make a concerted effort. So what I've done in an unofficial way is done my official wind test of the strategies. And so what I did first is point out to you our existing strategies that we have adopted. And a lot of them fall under the category of the previous and any other thing or strategy you can come up with. So I provided that to you so you can see what we've adopted as strategies. And then I did my weather test for the next coming storms and tried to generally rate what I thought was feasible, maybe moderately feasible, things that are, I think, in low feasibility. And then I put a $sign, the old restaurant, concept. And it's not perfect, because as I started reading again today, I was like, well, I could have added one there or taken off a $sign. It just depends on how you want to look at the cost to the implementation versus the cost of it, or the cost of setting it up versus the cost of its implementation. Like reducing building permit fees. Really easy up front to say, well, we can reduce building permit fees, but on the long haul, that can cost. We can reduce impact fees. That's pretty easy to do, to reduce the impact fees. But are we funding, we're planning our parks with the impact fees?
Yeah.
It could be costly on the other end of the spectrum. So I just looked at it. So the idea initially was trying to say what would be reasonable in Centerville and what would be potentially the cost to start that strategy, and not so much what the end result financially would be. And so really tonight is to just go through these and not do them by one per se, unless you want to. But I think the purpose is to find out kind of a mark of a few strategies that you want to consider, whether that's 6 or whether that's only 3 or whether that's 7, that we ought to further investigate and make it a part of an official attempt to amend the general plan and include the strategies. So we don't have the answer of which strategies we're going to select in the end, in my mind. We've just kind of got a pot of ones to look at, staff start looking at them more, but we have to cross the threshold where today is a discussion, but October 1st is we've got to send it in. We have a city council that needs to adopt it, and we also need to notice the official, we intend to change our general plan. And so if we get a bag full of strategies, then I would go forward to start noticing it. We're going to intend to do our general plan, and these are the things these are the items we're going to look at. We've taken other ones off. These are the items we're going to look at, and we start going through our process to narrow down. And that may narrow us down to we think it's only 3 that are feasible, and we'll sacrifice the priority status. Or we might pick 4 and say, hey, that'll hit us maybe in the middle of the road. So, but hopefully I'm making sense. So, Chair, I'm really just looking for how would this group want to go through these strategies and say, you know, Corey, add that in the basket and probably leave that one out.
Let me ask you a couple questions, Corey. So you talk about in your introductory paragraph, your background paragraph, the bill requires municipalities to adopt a minimum of 3 strategies, and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
That is in order to receive any TIF funds or any consideration for TIF funds. Is that correct?
3 is mandatory by law.
Okay, and what's the penalty if you don't? Just curious.
Oh, a number of things. They have the old penalties that still exist, that if you're proven to use your zoning and your tools to prohibit moderate income housing, the developer can win suit. I think beyond that, if you fail to do this, I think you're considered in default, and it probably affects your status among any grant or any opportunity with the state. And then if you really want to stretch what the penalty is, you know, they throw Corey in jail and you guys all celebrate.
Yeah, that's a stretch. Okay, and then how much has Centerville received in TIF funds in the past, do you know?
A number of projects. So our bike lane projects come under that. I believe our bridge, with pedestrian bridge, was part of that funding. We've applied for the trail on the 1250 West northbound under the funding year. So a lot of our trail and bike lanes have been built under those funds.
And TTIF is not a thing for Centerville because we don't have a front runner stop or anything here.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's generally what they apply to, station areas, you know, stops of that nature, not just a bus shelter.
Right, okay. And then in your write-up, you've got strategies 6A through 6D. Those are the existing ones in the general plan,
Correct.
okay? All right, let me ask you about, does anybody else have any more questions just broadly or very generally before we talk about maybe some of the specific ones?
Just remind me, we can't choose these same 4,
That was kind of what I was wondering.
or we can?
We can, except for the ones we've completed.
And
Well,
which ones
there's
of the-
one strategy that,
Have we completed these 4 then?
where is
I
it?
mean, I don't know how you complete some of these. I mean,
Well, maybe that's, oh, yeah, are they out?
yeah,
Yeah,
So-
there's one, I'm trying to remember. Okay, go to moderate feasibility, and the third item with 3 red says demonstrate implementation of other program or strategy to address the housing needs. So I won't say that we throw it out, we'd have to flush out any of those strategies to match what the intent of that paragraph is how are you targeting now the 80% with those strategies?
Because one we had has been reworded to this, is that what you're saying?
Say that again?
One strategy we, of the 4 has now been transformed into this?
It hasn't. We used a catch-all clause in the other state code that said, or any other strategy the city can come up with.
So HB 462 took out the or anything else
Yes.
part.
And now it says, it's giving you some options, but it has a targeted expectation for choosing any other strategy.
So just help me understand, can we keep with these 4? Or we have to come up with new 4
You can keep these
altogether?
4 in addition to the 3.
Keep these 4 in addition to 3 new ones?
3 that are on the state's.
You are
You
required to
have to
do
pick
3 new.
3, not necessarily, they don't have to be new, but they have to be 3 from the list that the state says you got to pick from this list.
And this list of 1 through 4 are not from the state list? They're
Yeah, that's right, because these 4 were under the
old
old,
code.
whatever you want to
Whatever.
do.
Got
with
it.
everything.
Okay.
But Corey, why can't we, for example, the first completed one, create or allow for reduced regulations related to, why couldn't we adopt that one and say, we're going to, maybe, and this is an example, I'm not saying for sure we're gonna do this, reduce regulations related to internal or detached ADUs? You know, because we have an ADU regulation or, ordinance in place, but or maybe our strategy is we're gonna make it easier to have an ADU. That's our new strategy.
You could. I think the question that's going to come into play is the state already sets your regulatory pattern of what you can do. So the reduction is very little other than we've added design standards for new construction or additions to the home. And you could just say we take those away and we just go with the state requirements. I think that will be raised as a question is, are you
Really trying.
Are you just bait and switch the same strategy?
But would it be possible, because the state only regulates and requires internal ADUs, so possibly the city could address extra or separate, a separate structure ADU, not just internal?
Detached
Yeah, detached.
ADUs is what it calls.
Yeah.
I think you're adding to the ADU, so you could argue that's a reduction in ADU standards, but I suspect that it'll come up suspect, because to do a detached, you're gonna add a lot of different regulations that are not in the state bill, so they're not gonna look at it as a reduction in ADU requirements. They're gonna look at it, you're doing detached, so
Well-
you've allowed more, but now you have all these other standards in order to do the detached.
So we're gonna allow for detached ADUs. Today, we don't allow for them. So the thing says create or allow for.
Well, we allow them internally, and I think that's where the state has not grappled with. They limited it to internal and decided not to walk the road of a detached ADU. I think we could try it, but I suspect that they'll say that's not a reduction towards affordability.
Okay.
It's not on the list.
I like it, it's a good one.
Did you have any other questions, Heidi?
But could we utilize that, we potentially could argue to utilize that for like this one that you're saying, demonstrate implementation of any other program or strategy.
Yeah, and reduce those local regulations towards it
Right,
later.
so there are ways that if that's what we choose and that's what we'd like, we could probably find one of these options where it's like an overarching strategy or something and say, this is our strategy.
Yeah, because I think in some sense you argue the reduction is that we don't allow them, and now we do
Right.
allow detached. Now it just comes down to how are you targeting that to
Right.
the affordable group?
Corey, so under high feasibility, the second one down, implement zoning incentives for moderate income units in new developments. What type of incentives could that be? Can you give us an example, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a very broad term in incentives. So you could give the bonus densities as incentives to try to get to moderate income housing. You could rather than a bonus density, you could create an incentive program that says you're 8 units an acre in an RH zone, but you're 12 units an acre if affordable housing is a part of it. So it's instead of a bonus density, it's a higher set. In some sense, instead of saying, if you do all this nice stuff that we want, here's your bonus. That's one way of accomplishing it. The other one is saying, look, our multifamily density is 8 units an acre. Because right now we allow up to 12 under the conditional use, which I've always struggled with in ordinance. We can say you're 8 units an acre, but you're 12 units an acre as if it's a higher zone if it has affordable housing component in it.
And so then do we require the developer, the property owner, to report to the city on a regular basis about the affordability of some of those units?
Well, I think that's where the rubber hits the road difficulty is, and that's why I put high dollars and sometimes in that high feasibility. It comes down to, all right, so somebody says, I'm going to do 4 of these units affordable. And let's just say they're honest. The developer says, yeah, I'm going to give 4 units, so I give you the 12 units an acre, 4 affordable. I sell it on the market as affordable, but now we're done. It's right back to the market rate. So there's always that other check that comes into is who monitors, how long does it last? Is it the first or second sale? Is it a 5-year horizon before you can now put it out to the market?
Sure.
And this is where all the staff, the time, the costs, the programming, and so I've seen one, like working for Ogden, we did have one, but neighborhood development ran the whole program.
Yeah, the problem I see with that is the developer says, hey, brother-in-law, buy this and flip it and make a quick profit on it.
But isn't a lot of the moderate income housing a rental unit as well? Because I remember, when I was very first married, calling an apartment and they said, well, how much do you make? And I'm like, what? And they said, you can't live here because this is for a certain income
Yeah,
bracket.
so now you have a rent restrict clause.
So it's a rent restrict clause.
On it.
And that was in Bountiful, so.
And then auditing that rent restriction is the long-term program. So, I compared to Summit County. Summit County.
like that would be
So,
very much.
so another one is that you get with another jurisdiction. So Summit County got with Wasatch County, and they have a housing entity that's a interlocal agreement with the 2 cities. I don't know if it's set up as a housing authority or district or whatever, but developers pay into that when they develop a project, and then they go and buy property and build units. And it becomes, so I think they built, the last I heard was like 600 units, which again, for Summit County, Wasatch County, probably, less than 1% mark for the housing, but joining up together, puts out more housing than what was not happening there.
Under high feasibility again, the third $2 sign one, create or allow for and reduce regulations related to multifamily residential dwellings compatible in scale and form with detached single-family residential units located in walkable communities. Could you explain that one a little bit, or?
I explain it about as good as you're reading it. I think it's very broad. My initial one is okay, you've got to figure out how you're consider an area a walkable community. So that's one aspect of how you say this is a walkable community within a residential or a mixed-use zone. And how do you establish that your mixed-use zone and your regulations are going to be reduced if that type of project is developed?
Yeah.
What are the reduced regulations? We don't longer worry about building heights.
That would not.
I throw that out there because that always ends up with, what? So what are the reduced regulations for multifamily? Is it all just design? Does every city have this robust design standards and we're just going to say, yeah, make them look like whatever?
It just says compatible in scale and form with detached single-family residential. Pretty open-ended.
Yeah.
Very. That's
Are
why
they
I was-
townhomes? Does it mean
Well, I think
townhomes?
to me, that's how I read that, is it's describing multifamily residential dwellings that resemble single-family residences. which would be townhomes or something like it.
Which we're doing at CW Urban, CW Urban down
The Hive.
the Hive.
Yeah.
So can we say like, yeah, that, and also we're done for this year?
Well, isn't CW Urban doing that other one too, by the Coles?
They are.
And that one's similar too, where it's
They're doing the lane.
the
Yeah,
lane,
but I
yeah.
think the Hive introduces the problem of qualifying as reduced regulations. It was a plan development overlay, and we heightened the regulations to get where we wanted to be in exchange for other regulations we were willing to give up.
Would the Hive be considered moderate income housing? That's the other question. I don't,
$500,000 a unit,
Then no.
townhomes.
I doubt it. What's our threshold?
What
for
is moderate?
that's the
affordable housing
question.
right now?
What's moderate income housing?
80%.
80% of the area, the metropolitan statistical area median income, so I think we're sitting around 78,000 of income
Median income for the county?
for the county.
So
It might be higher,
median, hold on just a minute.
it's
Median-
80% of the median income.
Median
So
household.
I think we're at 90-something, or just over 100 for the county.
So the county's median household income is 87.5.
Is that the county's?
Yeah.
So then we go 80% of that. I thought the new numbers came out at 90,000 or something for the county.
$70,000 is 80% of that, and then we go, a third is what's considered for housing, right? Is that right? A third? A third of your income goes to
Well, that's what's
housing.
difficult about the housing is Wasatch Front Regional Council count transportation and housing costs not to exceed 50% of your household income. Your debt ratio for a loan is typically calculated at 30% of your income.
Yeah.
And so how is that really measured?
It does not say in the code?
Well, I guess I was wondering too, like, doesn't just what's happening with interest
It's
rates
easier to
in the
measure
market-
rents, by the way. They'll measure rents. What's that?
Well, I'm just thinking, like, doesn't what's happening in the market with interest rates and housing prices determine this somewhat outside of our control?
You just earned your American Certified Institute Planners badge, because that's exactly what we're all asking.
Yeah.
It's like, we have no control over what the interest rates did, and they just priced out in the last 3 months. They've gone up 4%. So it's priced out a significant amount of people that were otherwise qualified for their loan while they were waiting for it to be built, and now they can't qualify for it.
Yeah. So if
Welcome to the state
80%,
legislative session.
That's just economics.
if 80% of 87.5 is 70, then a third of that monthly is $1,900 a month.
Which
So
is insane.
rent or mortgage payment of $1,900 a month.
With our current interest rate today, which was different 3 months ago, which will be different in 3 months from now, how do you square that?
Right. Listen, well,
Why don't you not go off based off home prices, but based off of what people are earning right now? An interest, like,
that's what the median household income is.
What they're earning.
right, so then just say, you would just look at the percentage of how many, isn't it 80% less than that? So then regardless, you just say, if, as long as they can figure this amount, then we don't have to figure the housing price.
Interest rates and
You
all
know,
that
yeah, we
business.
don't have to figure all
Just
that.
straight off income is what
Just
you-
straight off income, that's what
Yeah,
our
they'll,
target
you'll,
is.
you'll find that all the state model data gives you great information on rent rates and very little information on housing costs.
It's all over the map.
So, I don't know, for me,
So it's a lot of educated guessing.
Well, and that's where I think, what I was mentioning before, I feel like, so a lot of these solutions are encouraging rentals, which is not something that I don't know that that's something that's, we're all, really focused on here in Centerville.
well, it's either rentals or density is what it encourages.
Right.
So, both of which doesn't seem like Centerville has an appetite for.
But truly in the code, if you're looking at the code and if you're looking at like the solutions that they're sort of encouraging, a lot of them they can be seen as rental-based.
Sure. Well, so here's
Yeah,
my
I
take.
would agree, because all of your statistics come out using rent rates.
Right.
And then the housing has a lot of assumptions based into it, because, are you looking at the county valuation, taxable valuation of it? Yeah, we know how well that works.
That's just so
If
hard.
everybody got their last tax bill this year that I did. So is it the county market rates? Well, we know that's not the MLS rates,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
No, I have, here's me getting up on my soapbox with this one, and unfortunately, we are not in a position to do much about it, but I have issues with the way the state has approached the whole moderate income housing thing in general. And I wish the legislature would make a change to it, because it really just kind of promotes, in my opinion, building a whole bunch of apartments to rent or density or whatever else it is, and it doesn't actually solve the problem, because you get, like the very first one on there, rezone for densities to facilitate moderate income housing. Well, we think, hey, great, here's going to be an opportunity for moderate income housing, and then all of a sudden, wha-bam, it's being sold for 2 times as high, right? And so we try and just fail.
Well, that's where I think we have to be wise about understanding the appetite and the dynamic of Centerville. Because if we look at that and we say this is high feasibility and it's not very expensive, is it really going to achieve the goal that we're trying?
Right.
Maybe not. So maybe that's, even though it has this green dollar sign next to it, maybe that's something that we say, well, this is not going to achieve the goal that we want. So that might not be what we want to choose.
Sure.
And
know,
I
get
agree,
it.
and it could be the issue that we do join up at a county level with the housing
Yeah.
and work out a strategy with them. And that's gonna take a lot of effort and time and commitment from the various communities, but maybe that's the better,
Well, so that's the thing, is if that's the goal, can we roll that goal for a few years until we get it done? If that's, it
because you
might
just
take a while.
report, okay, we're gonna implement it, we're gonna establish a partnership, da-da-da-da-da-da, and then we just report how we're progressing on that each annual year. It's not, did you accomplish it per se, and it's done, and you can cross it off the list. I don't think that's the intent.
Yeah.
The intent is reporting each year, what are your efforts? You selected this goal, what did you do this year to get that, a step forward in that?
Right. We don't get extra credit for finishing the list before every other city does.
No.
No.
Well, and Corey's saying it's a report, so if we fail, that's what it
That's
says in the
part of it.
report. Gosh, we made, this one didn't work out.
Yeah, so I would like to figure out some way, and yeah, maybe it is, we get together on a county level or something and put together some kind of fund or whatever it is, or I don't know. That might cost a little bit of money, but
So-
I think that maybe there's more appetite for something like that than density and a lot of rental units in the city.
Well, and Kevin, I hear your frustration with how this bill was written and drafted and everything, but I also feel like we don't have to be limited by, like we just talked about, this one rezone for densities. That's not gonna work to achieve the goal it may not work for achieving the goal here in Centerville. So let's look at this and say, okay, we don't have to achieve this in 6 months, in the calendar year. Let's look at what we truly think will be long-term, sustainable, good solutions for Centerville and encouraging moderate income housing, because we know that it truly is an issue. So let's look at these and come up with a solution that maybe it's harder, but we're willing to go through it. And it's not based on what the legislator said, it's what's best for Centerville.
Right, and you've heard me say this in here before. I believe that with the housing crisis that we have right now, it's not so much about we don't have enough apartments and condos, because, we're building a bajillion of them a year. We just need more housing, period, of all levels.
Of all levels.
Of all levels, so that the people who may be living across the freeway by the movie theater could move into a single-family home. But there's nowhere for them to go right now,
Or
because.
the ADUs that allow for an
Sure.
older couple to stay and provide an opportunity for someone to also live.
Yeah, so I believe we need to really take the shackles off the whole thing. Let's build everything of all income, or all size levels and price levels, and let, people move up if they want to move up.
Well, I agree to that to some extent, though. If we take the shackles completely off, then it's just market-driven.
I get it.
And if it's market-driven, that's the problem that we're in right now.
No, I know. The problem is that then it doesn't meet the requirements of what the state wants us to
Right.
do. So we have to play the state's game, until the state changes the game.
I think we can have like a positive outlook and say like, we can look at what will work for Centerville. Let's be proactive and long-term thinking, not like, we're shackled.
No,
Which,
I
mean,
get it,
but-
I get it. Look, that's why I'm saying, let's figure out a way to make it work for Centerville, but I do, and I know that we're recorded and on YouTube, but I blame the legislature for a lot of this.
So here's my perception of this House bill, and I haven't done background research on it and everything, but it's been identified that in the state, there is a shortage of moderate income housing and a demand for it that's not being met. And so they passed this House bill to encourage cities to allow more of it. Of course, we can say, well, we don't like that in Centerville, but every city can say that. And so you still have this problem where there's a shortage of moderate income housing. So the state's trying to address that, and it's going to be uncomfortable for most cities to say, how are we going to accommodate this? The fact is, there are a lot of low and moderate income people out there who need housing. And, to just say, we're only going to allow high income housing in our area because that's how we like it, doesn't address that problem. So, I mean,
No, but I think
I
that.
can't say I disagree with that. We have to accommodate all kinds of people, and, I don't think the whole city has to do that, but, there has to be some reasonable accommodation.
So, but I think it's not necessarily that we're saying we only like high-income housing or something like that, but it's, for example, the Symphony Homes, the new one, the big one up north, whatever that's called, can't remember what they're called.
Summerhill Lane.
Summerhill Lane, that's the one. Summerhill Lane has a mix of everything because that's what they decided was gonna be marketable and what would work for them. And love
Based
it,
on prodding from the city.
like it or not, it provides a lot of different options for things. Some of them on the east side are gonna be much less affordable than the ones on the west side, which in theory would be more affordable. Probably not fall under the limit for the moderate income housing, but, that's my example, that's my point is, let's develop a whole bunch of stuff and let's let it kind of shake out and we'll have a variety of options for people.
So, but the problem is if you just do that, you're just developing more high-income housing, and you still have the shortage of moderate-income housing. You haven't addressed the problem.
Well, but no, but part of my point is that you build that array of housing, and then people move out of apartments into those west side units at Summerhill Lane, and maybe those apartments then become more affordable because the demand is not quite so high for that stuff. You ease the demand on the apartments by building,
Which,
the
I
next
mean,
tier up.
Hypothetically, that assumption is that income-based, they can move up, which they may be able to and they may not. But I hear what you're saying, and the only counter that I would say is that the reasoning behind doing this, I believe, is that this incentivizing with these funds that are given, these TIF funds and everything, is it's spreading out so that there's not just one concentration of moderate income housing in an area of the valley. That each city, that like you just, to your point, the Summerhill Lane, each city is now saying, okay, like we need a little bit of moderate income housing, a little bit of regular, and the next city is doing the same thing, so that there's not just a place where it's like, oh, just push it all to wherever, and everyone else just gets to kind of like market-based solutions happening. So I hear the frustration, and I think if we look at this from like what can happen and what can really be utilized for Centerville, how can we be creative about these requirements and make it work for the goal and for what Centerville wants?
So let me give you one example, because I've heard it a little bit here, and I think it's a good thought pattern. We talked about, well, maybe some of these more complex ones is more beneficial than just raising the densities in Centerville. So an example is we go under, I put high feasibility, the first triple red $sign. Identify and utilize county or municipal general fund subsidies or other sources of revenue to waive construction-related fees that are otherwise generally imposed by county or municipality for construction or rehabilitation of modern income housing. That costs a little bit up front to do. But you're talking about, well, we could look at waiving construction fees with our general fund. We also have our RDA areas that are really supposed to reserve, I think it's something like 10% of their increment to help with the rehabilitation and housing. And then we scale that back to some type of incentive program or something, so that if somebody comes in to rehabilitate a home, or if somebody comes in to develop several homes, that we can waive those construction fees with that. And it'll be based on a little bit of
Yeah.
tracking and effort to say, you're gonna build a couple of units that are in the affordable range under this, and then, it still has a problem, deed restricted for, the first 3 years, or whatever we have to do to decide it's simple versus a big monitoring program. Do that, and we've accomplished that. And that's gonna take a couple of years or two to get together, and if that's also coupled with the county or other jurisdictions in a partnership, that might take 3 years to develop, and, the contribution of those funds go there. But that takes a concerted commitment that's our goal as a city, because raising densities, and I'll continue to make the argument, doesn't create affordable housing. Not in the market pattern. It just won't.
Yeah, we've seen
That's my
it.
concern, that first one, rezone densities.
And
I
then-
mean, a lot of the high-density housing we're seeing in Centerville and around surrounding areas, I don't think would be considered.
It's not
modern.
affordable.
Yeah,
And
so-
then it's not what Centerville wants largely as well. I have a question for you. Could you do a CCNR or something that's tied to the plot that talks about?
Yeah,
like,
you certainly,
income-
you can certainly
income?
transfer to CCNRs. The biggest difficulty is you can't rely on the CCNR as the city's enforcement tool. That's where the bad part of CCNR go.
Or some other tool that is like connected to the plot or to
That's what I'm talking about, the deed restriction
deed
issue.
restriction, that's what it would be.
Well, yeah, but that's my complaint with a lot of that, is how do we make sure that it's moderate income housing,
I really like, we're just kind of like spitballing here. I like on moderate feasibility, the $4 sign, the last $4 sign. And I'm like, really, is this very, very, very expensive? The develop a moderate income housing project for residents who are disabled or 55 years older. The reasoning behind why I like that is because I feel like it meets the needs of a lot of people in Centerville that possibly, like you're talking about, Kevin, having people move out and different things. If we had, anytime that I see something that is sort of geared towards older residents, it seems like that's a natural progression of how that would help, bring other families into the market for these bigger homes that older couples are not leaving.
So Corey, is the reason why that's $4 signs is because, the city would have to subsidize that housing?
Yeah, what does
or
that
something?
mean?
Yeah, we'd be part of either our own project, if you're big enough to put in funds together, a project that's interlocal agreement, one of those other strategies, or a partnership with a developer that develops a product like that.
There's not very many of them, in, not even just our county, but this region, because, I was trying to find a place for my grandma, and there's like one in Harriman, and there's one in like Syracuse.
Yeah.
And like, there's just not a lot of this option available. So I think you're right, Becky, but I don't know how you would do that, but I think that would be a great idea.
Well, and
To
here's-
try.
That's the thing.
Again,
Even
we're
if
just
we
gonna
say-
try.
Even if we say like, this is something that we think is good for our community.
Yeah.
We're going to try to walk down this road.
Put this as a goal and then figure out
This
how
is
to
the goal,
get there.
And oh, oops, it's too expensive, or
We
I don't know,
have
maybe
no
it is.
idea how we'd fund it.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
no idea yet, but
But
this
we
is-
want to try to get there.
Yes.
I
don't know.
I like that idea.
I think it's a lovely idea, but the two major hurdles that are really, really high is that you're asking a city to be a developer.
Yeah.
And Salt
Yeah, I
Lake
don't-
City is equipped for that, Centerville is not.
Yeah, I don't like that.
And then second, you're asking taxpayers to pay, and Centerville residents don't like that.
True.
Or
But
could you
if
do
we-
something to entice a developer, I guess, who does this model here? somehow.
And if we don't look at it as us being the developer, but maybe, like as Corey said, could we do an local something, or like at least look into something about what could potentially.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a partnered project where you reduce the construction costs, that is a little bit of cost, so you decide that. And then you do a program that does the deed restriction or whatever, and you partner with a company that develops these kind of projects. But it's a big apple to,
It's a lovely outcome.
So I like, under low feasibility, the second single dollar sign, zone or rezone for higher density or moderate income residential development in commercial or mixed use zones, blah, blah, blah. So before COVID and before everything died, we were talking about redoing Main Street, and we had significant discussions about doing, mixed use there, residential, well, retail on the bottom, residential up above, in a limited scale. I feel like that would probably fit in that one, right?
It sounds like part of the reasoning to that one too is that where you have moderate income housing, you typically want it close to transit, et cetera, because, saves costs on transportation as well.
Might also be a good impetus to get back on Main Street and finish that whole part.
just two planner ones, one very painful wound. Main Street is still a very big wound to me that has never healed. That's one that I'm not sure is a hurdle that we'll ever get over in a reasonable amount of time, but I'm willing to be wrong. But the second one is the city didn't really like the Shorelands Commerce Park residential zone to support the Commerce
Yeah,
Park.
I know.
And that was the exact design of
That's
that
where I was kind
project.
of thinking about it too. What if, Corey, does it give any guidance or encouragement to hold public hearings or request feedback from the public about these types of things?
Well, we have to
Or
have
what do
a
you think about
public
that?
hearing when we amend the general plan.
Yeah, you'll have the public hearing. What I think you're
Right.
doing is a precursor to that. And,
Yeah.
well, your timeframe's October 1st. So,
close.
you could fault that maybe we got started too late.
But what I'm saying is, I mean, maybe we choose a handful, maybe we don't have the whole list, but maybe we talk, discuss, we present some options, we say,
Well, I think you could do an open house in
and,
front of a session and send out
yeah,
in the water utility bill that we're talking about these different strategies, come to the pre-meeting
or talk to even the city council as well, I don't know, just,
I mean, I get
So-
your gist is to help get buy-in from the community.
yeah.
What about the second to last
Oh,
one?
I was just gonna say that one.
On,
Yes,
The very second to last one.
yes, go, I'm psyched. Go.
My comment's probably not as meaningful as yours, but I'm sure there's some derelict home somewhere that we could
I know of a couple, yeah.
throw some money at and call it good, right?
Sometimes I wonder if mine is one.
My teenagers made mine pretty derelict.
But yeah, I thought that was a good opportunity that
But
we
we
should
could
look
also.
into.
I like it too.
Limited in scope, right? Like,
Yes.
we're not gonna, because first of all, there's not mass uninhabitable housing in Centerville.
I have them by my house. There's a few of them.
There are some.
There are
though.
some.
There
There are
are
some.
There.
I don't know, that's, anyway.
So the first triple red dollar sign one sounds like a little bit what we were talking about, where you would apply
The very first?
incentives. Yeah, the first triple red dollar sign, under low feasibility.
Under
Sorry.
low feasibility.
Oh, I see, yeah. So that's talking about apply for federal funds or tax
Yeah.
incentives to promote construction of moderate income housing. That's kind of what we were saying is, instead of the city being the developer of
Right.
something, we could try to find funds so that a developer would be enticed to do a development. Now, I don't know how complicated that is, or what the likelihood of getting those funds would be.
But it doesn't say you have to get them. It just says you have to apply for them.
Yeah.
Can we fill out the worst possible application in the history of applications and?
Well, don't say it like that right now.
No, we want to, but here's the thing, our goal is to do this, guys. Like, our goal is just to really, truly,
Yeah,
at least that's my goal.
I have a question. Now, I might be off in left field, but just thinking about Centerville, we are landlocked. We don't have a lot of land to develop. Are we thinking of developing or like tearing down neighborhoods, or what are we trying to do? I mean, we don't have, how much open land do we have to even develop?
Okay, well,
very little.
that's where the interlocal agreements could be really beneficial.
Yeah.
To us.
Well, that's why the Utah housing one could work. Here's the other option. Can we just rezone all the residential in the city to low? Set a goal to increase zoning, and then we'll go back and put it back where it was.
No,
We just raised densities across the board.
So,
I think I read somewhere in there.
one of the things that, in my limited experience, I believe in, and I'm interested in being proven wrong, is that when you subsidize a developer, I'm not confident that it actually translates down to on the boots on the ground kind of savings. So any of the selections that we look at where we're incentivizing developers, I'm disinclined. The ones where you actually put money or value in the hands of the homeowner, that makes a difference. I've been the recipient of a HUD home program as a teacher out in West Valley, and it made a huge difference in my wife and my finances when we were very first starting out 25 years ago. Had it not been for that subsidy, we wouldn't have been able to do what we did, and it was a significant difference in my life. So I'm more inclined to look at things like under high feasibility, the last triple, where
Yeah.
you identify an employee, you see if they qualify, and you help them out.
I like that one
The
too.
mortgage assistance program does seem like a good way to go.
It's just whether or not we can convince the deciders to do that. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm not aware
I
of
think-
cities doing that, right? I mean, that's usually being a federal program or banks
True.
doing that, but
There are
maybe there's a
cities
way
that
the
do
city
it. There are cities that do it, and there may be some resistance to that simply because there aren't a lot around here. But there are some that do it.
Well, I would say that a good portion of your employees, particularly the Public Works Department and so forth, are moderate income level individuals, and they generally don't live in the community.
Correct.
But see, that's the thing, is that I think about, for example, police officers. In my opinion, good community policing would also include police officers who may actually live here, right? Because they would create relationships and whatever else. And so that might be a good example of some, a program that would help our police department to do.
And it doesn't say you have to fund 50 houses.
No.
No,
Just create a program that does something and activate it and be successful a couple of times.
yeah, I think honestly, from this discussion and other things, and this might be part of the discussion with the city council as well, is unless we want to just crank up densities, we need to be prepared to spend a little bit of money.
Or even if it's not, I don't know if necessarily, I mean, like, I agree with your assessment of money, dollar signs on here, but I think part of the money is investment in time and maybe potentially thought process as well of how is this going to be implemented, how is this going to be reported, how is this going to be whatever. And to Mason's point, what we choose here is not only just what we want as a city, but this could change lives for several families in our community and our surrounding community. So I am really inclined to looking at what is something that Centerville can do or would like to see, and that could truly make a difference, could truly change lives.
Yeah, and I think if you create some of these a little more complex programs, we're gonna take our initial funds from wherever the council wants to, draw them from, and there are those who can help you structure these
Yeah.
programs and developments and these interlocals, so.
So what's the next step here?
I'm hearing it thematically that efforts that may be partnering should be considered, efforts that might help local employees, be considered. I'm hearing thematically even a little bit of, there might be a house or two out there that we could either assistance fund or acquire, whatever the program ultimately comes to being, and accomplish those.
Or let's pick something that might take a little bit of time to do so that we're
Yeah.
not just checking them off the list.
Right.
And I also, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I'm still very interested in the deed restricted options because I think that's also more of the savings to the
And
homeowner.
that's when you're talking about like the 55 and older.
Or whatever it is,
Oh.
whatever program we choose, if it's a partnering, if it's whatever, having disability, whatever. I love the option of having like, this is going to the person, not necessarily like a benefit or a bonus to the
The developer.
developer.
Yes.
Like, so a deed restricted, I don't know if that's the only,
Right, I think we can
tool.
get with the Davis Housing Authority and see what they're running on their programming and see
Yeah.
a partnership with them.
but
if
how to
that's
make
what-
that longevity last so that it's continuing, I think that's, I'm really interested in that.
My only hangup with that is, like with deed restricted stuff, is I feel like that's government getting a little too involved with private property, you know? But I like the idea of doing some of this stuff, but the problem is you can't guarantee that it's gonna stay moderate income housing, or it's even gonna be moderate income housing to begin with, you know?
Well, unless you have a deed restrict, that's where
I
I'm
know,
saying.
and that's, but yes, but you see where the
There's the
problem comes
trade-off.
from.
I feel like there is the trade-off for sure where I appreciate and love, you know, having ownership and freedom. But I do think if we're trying to incentivize or implement this, that's where I'd be interested at least looking at that.
Yeah, so Corey, how much time do we need then to
Well,
do this?
I think what I'm hearing, if you kind of give a consensus, is I'll go back to the list, rethink through some of these elements, put them into the bag and bring them back to your next meeting and say, and give you the original and say, here's the initial bag that I think you should start looking from.
Okay.
Could we also at the time start either setting up a meeting or a work session with city council or doing an open house or, I mean, is there appetite for any of that? Or do you want to just move forward?
Well, could we do that at our next meeting, maybe, and have, and,
I can always request, careful what you say, Corey.
Okay, wait, before.
I
we-
know there was a lot of like public interest in the
Yeah.
pickleball situation.
Yep.
Yeah,
That was on
I'm-
social media and that was whatever. And if we were using that same approach,
Yeah, I'm worried about the city council in the time frame that we have, the personality of the council. I'm worried about getting into, like we did with the land use, Main
Yeah.
Street land use, commercial uses, where it ended up being a meeting, we think you're on the right track, but we never went anywhere with it.
yeah.
And so I'm almost thinking that you're the expert planners, this bill is required, so it's not a debatable thing that the bill can be ignored for a period of time. We have a deadline. These are your recommended reasons and why. We've checked it through, putting a bag together, public hearings, open house, whatever you decide, next month. And then we've made our recommendation. And then they can run,
Yeah.
if they want to do more densities and don't want to do a program that's
Or go
partnership,
against what public has said or delay when
let
there's a
them,
deadline.
let them do that. But
Yeah.
you've at least put your planner out and says, these are the strategies we think are the best fit for our community.
yeah. I think that's what we do, is I think we say, we have a public hearing, and we say, these are the ones that we are recommending. Hey, public, tell us,
Yep.
how you feel about these four, and here's the rest of the list. If you
Here's the
feel,
bag.
if you feel really strongly about one of these other ones that didn't make the cut, tell us why,
Could we do, could we get Bryce involved and do sort of a similar social media outreach and encourage, like sort of getting people involved more than just like public notice?
Yeah.
I think that would be beneficial.
I'm also wondering, you mentioned like the Davis Housing Authority.
They own the duplex unit just east of the school, Centerville Elementary.
Don't they also, did they acquire the one that's like First North
They may have, that's the only one I know, I empirically know.
These?
I guess when I hear you mention them, I don't really understand what they offer. Like, do they have one option that you just join and go? Or then do you have to have a discussion with them to tailor what option would work best for us and to create a partnership?
I'm not familiar with the depth and breadth of the housing authority. I know what the housing authority basically can do.
Yeah.
But what they've done that I understand is that they've acquired certain properties and then they rent them out at
Would-
affordable rates.
And is that just their only, that's just their only process?
I
Would it
can't say
be-
it's their only process. I think it's,
Would it be worth like reaching out to them and having them come speak to us about what they do?
I don't-
so we
I don't
know
see
what
any
they
problem
do?
with
Or, I mean,
reaching out,
maybe
saying-
everybody knows and I just don't know.
I don't know, I think that would be, I mean, if we're looking into solutions that are, collaborative, that would be a great place to start.
Seems like that'd be a good work session with the city council, so that they're on the same page too, 'cause
yeah, I
I'd
think
hate to have-
I think the working and partnering with them would happen after and see what the housing
So
authority
like you're
do,
saying we could like
or what the-
choose that option before we even talk to them?
Well, you could,
And then when we report
or
back on our
or give them a
progress,
call and, or I can go on the
Yeah.
website and see what
Okay.
they do.
we report back to the state on our progress and we say, you know what, we failed because we realized that was a bad choice on our part.
They rejected us. I don't know. I
Well,
don't
then
know.
you have the state, so I think there's gonna be honest with you, I think even at the county level, there is gonna be an evolution of these discussions, and they're gonna be
Options and
taking
programs.
on more concepts and participating into it. Because I think the communities that are astute are going to start landing where you're at.
Yeah.
Rezoning densities is not working, folks. And the market rate is a pattern that we have absolutely no control out.
Zero
And it's just shown it's worse in the last year for that. So if we're truly going to accomplish it, it's going to be some of these partnerships. And they'll either survive or they'll fail, and that will be the answer that comes back
Yeah.
to the state.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, Corey, maybe come back to us with 4 recommendations, I guess.
And I will try to get either information from the housing authority or them to show us what they do
Okay.
for the next meeting.
Let's not limit it to 4, I don't know, is that,
Maybe 4 and a couple of alternates.
well, I trust Corey to just come up with some, I don't want to limit the number, right?
Well, we only have to pick 4. 3,
You'll have to pick 3.
3. So we,
4 wasn't already an
if we,
alternate.
yeah, pick 4 was already an alternate.
I would direct Corey to pick some stuff that he thinks is good, and then we can narrow it down to 4. That's what he was planning on doing.
Yes,
Well,
but
I
you
know,
just
but-
make my job easier when you say these 3.
okay, 3 and a couple of alternates or something.
Okay.
I don't know. Make,
Well, we might eliminate one,
Give a good amount.
so.
I feel like we're gonna.
Make it
yeah,
reasonable,
yeah,
but-
Have a discussion.
make it reasonable, but, yeah, well, allow us to have a discussion, but we don't want to be here till 11 PM.
Perfect.
Understood.
I was gonna say 9 PM.
It's already 8 o'clock.
I know. 8:05. All right, let's move on then.
Not 8:15 yet?
It's almost 8:15. Hang in there. Community Development Director's report, City Council report. Corey?
Thank you, Chair Daly. We did move, which I originally planned was the update the single-family unplatted lots process. And for my lack of detailed thinking, that was the meeting that was canceled rather than tabled. And so I talked with Lisa and we agreed that there was no rush to get it done at this meeting so that I could renotice it. Because carrying that notice through was kind of like dropping in that abyss hole. You know, when you've got a tabling, it's carrying forward. And if you don't act on it or do anything, it disappears and we renotice. And here we had a canceled meeting and I just didn't renotice it. So it's for your next meeting being scheduled. And now we're adding the issue of the moderate income housing. I did want to put the landscape ordinance update discussion. You can leave it on or take it off for that meeting. It's up to you, but the council did ask us to start looking at, for an example, is we require 50% or 75% of your landscape area to be plantings. Maybe we should reduce that. Some elements like that where we can be a little bit more water wise with our landscape, still have an aesthetic appeal.
I have a question about that.
So I thought we could maybe start on that as a discussion,
Can we do what the city council does to us all the time and just table it indefinitely?
if you want.
Wow, you were like honest tonight. I have a question about that. I'm wondering if we can, I'm appreciating our water-wise solutions and agree with them, but I'm also recognizing that some of them present projects that maybe aren't what we necessarily want always and forever. I mean, so I'm wondering if this is like could we qualify it for duration of time based on like drought needs, or is it just too in the weeds?
I think if you
Just
could find,
change it.
I think you'd need to have some kind of metric that could be reliable, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, didn't the governor like put us in some sort of level of drought?
I don't know.
Would it
I'm
be
just-
attached to
Yeah,
that?
I'm just wondering if this is what we want, if we're changing these types of like requirements and suddenly, I don't know, we have like an 83 flood and we got all this, I'm not saying that's gonna happen, but I don't know, next year or whatever, who knows? I don't want us to be tied to that and then everyone's like, oh, I don't have to put any of this landscaping in. I don't know. I just-
Yeah,
But we do live in a
I mean,
desert.
I get you.
know.
I get what you're saying because I've got a lot of gravel in my yard. I spend a lot of time maintaining it. It's okay. It's no different than the time I spent doing lawn.
Right.
But I spend some time to make sure that the gravel works.
Yeah.
And I have neighbors that I
Don't.
refuse to turn in because Janie will say, you know, you ought to turn them in. You know better. I'm like, no, I'm the one that gets those calls. I'm not turning anybody in.
Well, it just becomes a code enforcement, and does the
Yeah.
city have an appetite for that code
Yeah, it's just
enforcement
a
or not?
nightmare, but, you know, if we go to a heavy gravel landscaping, I'm not sure that that answers the questions of everything that we ought to be thinking about, because I will agree, artificial turf, entire yard, will do nothing more than create a problem.
Right.
And the heat.
Right.
And the landfill 10 years from now, and all those other elements. And so I think we got a little headway with the council to say, beware of some of those things. And I think just going straight gravel is the same kind of concept. You know, now you're having the whole urban heat island. So now you have the whole question of, why are we requiring landscape islands? I'd rather just plow my snow, because you're not creating any less green space than the asphalt.
Yeah.
And so I hear you in, what's the consequences if,
Long-term.
you know, are we creating something in exchange for something else? But I do think that we do have a shift, and
guess
I
we
would
can talk
suggest
about
we'd keep,
this.
I think we should keep those shift down to a reasonable level
Yeah.
than an aggressive level of panic.
And we can talk more about this, but I just thought I'd bring that up while I was thinking about it, so.
Like they said, we'd have to have 6 straight years above average to even catch up to normal at this point.
Oh, really?
Like, we're not even close.
Yeah, I think we're in a shift. It's just, where do we go?
Okay.
And the answer is probably a few unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to mention on there, Corey?
And then we'll just add your, you can keep that on or off. We'll add your ADU
Let's talk about the landscaping stuff, that's fine.
Okay, it's just a discussion, to start getting our hands around what we're thinking.
Okay.
City council, nothing yet to report.
Okay. No, it's because all of our stuff's been tabled.
New news.
Okay. All right, let's go, come down the home stretch and let's talk about minutes. Let's review these minutes. It should be pretty quick. Anybody have any recommended changes for page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 5?
Chair, I motion that we accept the planning commission minutes of Wednesday, July 13th as unamended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, that motion passes. I move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.